Administration attempting to replace Israeli Prime Minister. Top officials of the Biden administration met in early March 2024 with Minister-at-Large Benny Gantz, who is part of the National Unity Government that was formed after the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7th. Benny Gantz was in Washington, D.C. and met with Vice President Kamala Harris, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan at the White House. High-level consultations between the White House and the Israeli government during the war are not uncommon, but this meeting raised concerns in Israel, Israeli watchers, and the press in the United States. It is no secret that President Biden and President Obama have a history of tense relationships with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that is close to public loathing and is woven with mutual distrust. Netanyahu was a vocal critic of President Obama's foreign policy achievement of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, that is known as the Iran nuclear deal. Obama, in return, provided U.S. tax dollars to funnel to a nonprofit organization and rallied U.S. political groups to raise money to finance defeating Netanyahu in his 2015 election. Obama and his allies' actions was interfering in the internal affairs of Israel to defeat the incumbent, and it appears that the Biden administration is attempting to repeat the actions of 2015 to interfere in Israeli politics, to defeat Netanyahu and end his tenure as prime minister. Benny Gantz, minister's role in Netanyahu's government is not a normal one. The Israeli government was in the process of forming a new government because of a close election that provided no clear majority to any party. The negotiations to form a coalition government were ended after the Hamas attack on October 7, 2023, and the largest parties in the Israeli parliament, called the Knesset, agreed to form a national unity government with Netanyahu as the prime minister. Netanyahu is the leader of the Likud party, and Benny Gantz was a former deputy prime minister and a leader of the Blue and White Alliance, an alliance of liberal Zionists and centrist parties, with the intent to defeat Netanyahu and Likud in 2022. Benny Gantz was also former chief of staff of the IDF, Israeli Defense Forces, and the former speaker of the Knesset. Gantz has a role in the unity government, but he is also a political rival to Netanyahu and is considered a potential successor to Netanyahu. This is the person that the administration chose to meet with high-level administration officials. The meeting was nominally about Israeli operations in the Gaza Strip. The administration has publicly called for Israel to show restraint in its operations over concerns of civilian casualties and the expected operations in Rafah to defeat the last remnants of Hamas. Rafah is in an area with a significant number of Palestinian refugees that were displaced from northern Gaza, and the administration is concerned of additional civilian casualties an operation in Rafah will create. In addition to the direct casualties, the administration is concerned with the humanitarian crisis to the Palestinians that have been cut off from supplies of food and water, medical aid, and shelter. This meeting took place after the administration attempts to negotiate a 6-week ceasefire in Gaza that failed after the disagreement over the terms, mainly around the return of Israeli hostages that Hamas took during the October 7th attack. The administration was disappointed with the fall-through of the negotiations, which they privately blame on Netanyahu's intransigence, because the administration was relying on a ceasefire to provide humanitarian relief to the Palestinians. After the meetings, the U.S. announced the decision to airdrop supplies to the Palestinians in Gaza and to create a temporary port in Gaza to offload greater amounts of humanitarian relief supplies. The administration stated that the purpose of the meeting was to consult with the Israeli government and relay Netanyahu's Washington's position on the war. There is probably legitimate topics that needed to be discussed between the U.S. and the Israel governments, but Gantz was not sent by Netanyahu. Netanyahu refused to authorize the visit and told the Israeli ambassador, Mike Herzog, not to assist Gantz or attend the meetings with him. Gantz was not specifically invited to the U.S., but was on a visit to the U.S. and was subsequently invited by the Biden administration to meet with Harris, Blinken, and Sullivan while in the U.S. It is a matter of debate and stretches the common sense that Gantz, in a time of war, just decided to visit the United States to then be invited by the administration to meet. Gantz was the administration's preference in 2022 to assume prime minister role and replace Netanyahu, and this meeting took place without the authorization of the Israeli cabinet. It appears the administration is circumventing diplomatic norms and protocols and ignoring the fact that Gantz was not authorized to meet with the White House. The conclusion is that the White House is attempting to treat Gantz as a de facto prime minister, or at the very least elevate his status and downgrade Netanyahu's. Either way, the administration is attempting to displace Netanyahu's influence from his central role in directing the war in Gaza and leading Israel. The other issue is less foreign policy disputes that the Biden administration has with Netanyahu, but is also running for re-election, and the continuing war in Gaza is creating domestic issues for the Democratic Party. Both Jewish and Muslim groups in the U.S. vote overwhelmingly Democrat, and the ongoing war is straining the Democrats' coalition of identity groups. Though the administration preferred policy is to provide conditional support to Israel in its war, it has largely turned a blind eye to the public anti-Semitism of supporters of the Muslim group within the Democratic coalition to appease their anger. The Muslim supporters are an energetic and can be a disruptive group within the party and actively protest in public for the U.S. to force Israel to end the war and allow the creation of a Palestinian state forthwith. These supporters have threatened to withhold support of Biden in the election if he fails to meet their demands, and they have started an uncommitted campaign in the Democratic primary. The Biden administration is aware that as the war goes on and the civilian casualties continue to mount, there is a risk that the Muslim populations will not vote in the general election and could cost the party in close states like Michigan and Minnesota. On the other hand, if the administration does not support Israel and is not sympathetic to the events of October 7th, it will risk losing Jewish support. The administration wants the war to end and end soon so it can keep its coalition together and focused on the general election. The Biden administration meeting with Gantz is a desperate move to end the war in Gaza by supporting changing Israeli leadership in the middle of a war to be able to protect the U.S. Democratic coalition. The use of public pressure against Israel or providing humanitarian relief to the Palestinians are seen as insufficient band-aids on an ever-growing wound of domestic politics that will not sufficiently satisfy Palestinian supporters within the Democratic Party. The Biden administration, like the Obama administration, have taken a public position to circumvent and undermine Netanyahu, which is nothing more than the Biden administration interfering in the internal political affairs of Israel. The administration has not gone so far as to publicly push for a removal of Netanyahu, but have become more critical of him in public. And with the history of interfering with Netanyahu's elections before, watchers of the meeting last week must think that the U.S. is trying to weigh in on Israeli politics in the hope of swaying U.S. domestic politics.